Hi friends, welcome to yet another edition of Quick Tip videos brought to you by dataplatformcentral.com. In this edition, we can see how we can introduce dynamicity in copy data activity by parameterizing the linked data services. To illustrate this, let's see a quick demo of how to transfer some files which is set up inside an Azure Data Lake storage onto a local instance of SQL Server. As you see, I have few files set up inside an Azure Data Lake account which is storing the details of employee address. If you look at a particular file, it will look like this, which contains the details of the employee addresses inside an organization. In this demo, we are going to transfer the data from these sample files onto a local instance of SQL Server which is set up inside my machine. Let's go ahead and start creating the copy data activity for performing the demo. For this, go to the home page of your Azure Data Factory in your Azure account and click on Copy Data. This will start an instance of the wizard for creating the copy data activity. In the first screen, you can give the name for the task. Just give it any meaningful name. I am giving copy employee address SQL Server. Click on Next. This will take you to the next screen where you have to create a linked service for the source data source. If you are a person who are used to working in SSIS, you can see that the linked services in Azure Data Factory is similar to the connection managers you create inside your SSIS package. So here we are going to transfer the files from an Azure account onto our SQL Server instance. So in this case, we need to create a linked service to connect to the files folder which is inside the Azure Data Lake storage. For this purpose, click on Create New Connection. This will give you a lot of options giving the details of the sources to which Azure Data Factory is able to connect. Since in our case we are going to connect to an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2, I am going to choose Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2 as the source. Click on Continue. It will provide you with a wizard where you can pass the connection string information. Choose your Azure subscription and choose the account name that you have given for the Data Lake Storage. Click on Test Connection to ensure that you are able to connect to the account. Once the connection is successful, you can click on Create to create the linked service to the Azure file storage. Once the linked service source is done, you can click on Next, and then you can browse to the folder inside which you have the files. In this case, I have put all my files inside Source Files folder. So select Source Files, click on Choose, then click on Next, and you can select the text format and properties here. So in my case, it's a comma delimited files, so it's by default it parses the file and takes the property values correctly, so you don't have to change anything. And you can also see a gist of the data which is there in the files. You can ensure that it's the correct file that you have pointed to, and also the data have been passed correctly by the ADF package. Once this is done, you can go to the schema and check that it has got the schema information correctly. So in this case, if you refer the file has ID, employee number, address, city, state and country as the columns. This you can double check by going back to your file and checking the headers. Once you are happy that the file has been successfully parsed by ADF, you can click on Next. Now you need to create a similar linked service for connecting to your destination. So in this case, the destination is a local SQL Server instance. Since we are going to connect an Azure service to an on-premise SQL Server, we would require running a gateway. I have already configured a gateway for connecting to my local SQL Server instance. So once that is set up correctly, you can go to the local gateway and test for the connectivity to your database. Once you see that it's connecting successfully to your database, it means that the gateway is correctly set up for connections from Azure. So once this is confirmed, you can come back to your ADF package and click on Create New Connection. In this time, we are going to connect to SQL Server. So we need to choose the option as database, and inside that you can see an option for SQL Server. Click on SQL Server and click on continue. Again, you will be provided with a wizard for connecting to your SQL Server instance. The first step to change is to select the integration runtime as your gateway. Once that is done, you can then keep on adding the other properties like the server name, the database name, the SQL user you are using for authentication, and also the password. Once all the corresponding linked service connection string properties have been set up, you can click on test connection and see if it is able to connect to your local instance database correctly. Once you have entered all the property values correctly, it should be able to connect to your local instance and will get a connection successful message. On getting the message, you can click on create, and automatically the linked service will get created to connect to your on-premise SQL Server database. Now that both the linked services are created to the source as well as the destination, now we can go ahead and create the table and also the column mappings. Click on next, and you can see the mapping screen which maps from the source, which is Azure Data Lake Storage, to the destination. In this case, the destination is blank, so you need to select the corresponding table. So you can either choose to connect to an existing table by clicking on the existing table option, or you can go ahead and create a new table. For the sake of this demo, I am going to create a fresh table which I am going to name it as ADF underscore employee address, just to indicate that the data is coming through ADF package and the data that we are handling in this case is employee address. Once the table is created, you can click on next, and then you will be immediately provided with the column mappings tab, and by default each of these source columns will get mapped to a corresponding destination column, because in this case it's a new table. Click on next, and you will be provided with the data fault tolerance tab, where you can set any tolerance related properties if required. I'm going to ignore this because we are not going to set any special tolerance properties. You can click on next, and it will provide you with a summary detail of all the settings that you have set through the wizard. Once you review the settings and you are happy with it, you can click on next, and it will start validating the package that you have created inside ADF by itself, and you will automatically start creating the required data sets, the pipelines, and it will automatically start running the pipelines. Just wait for a moment until all the stages are over, and once everything is over, it will provide you with two buttons, using which if you want, you can go back and edit the pipeline, or if you are happy with the settings, you can click on monitor and it will automatically take you to the monitoring tab. Inside the monitoring tab, you can see the various instances of the pipeline run. Just look for the latest instance of your package and you can see the progress of the pipeline run. In case the package is successful, will be provided with an entry in the monitoring tab where it shows the name of the package, the time at which it started the current execution and it terminated the execution, and the result of that execution. So as you see from the current screen, our current pipeline execution has been a success. So once the pipeline execution is a success, you can go back to the SQL Server instance and check the contents of your table. So in this case, the table that we created was ADF underscore employee address. Right click on the table and choose select top 1000 rows, and can you see that it has created the data correctly. If you just choose the select statement directly, you can see the total number of data that got inserted into your table, which is around 6000 rows. Now that the ADF package has been created with static values, the next step is to introduce the dynamicity inside the package. For this purpose, we are going to add a series of parameters through which we are going to pass the values for different properties inside the package. To start off the activity, we will first go and truncate the table. Modify the previous select query into a delete and execute it to truncate the existing data from your table. Once it's truncated, you can go back to your ADF package and go to your source dataset. As of now, the source dataset points to a static value of source files which you have set inside the properties. Now we are going to make it into a dynamic by pointing it to a parameter that we are going to create inside the linked service. For this purpose, click on the file path property which is containing the status value, and you will be provided with a add dynamic content link which you can use to create the dynamic parameter through which you can pass the value. Click on add dynamic content. It will open an add dynamic content window through which you can map it to a parameter. You will be provided with a plus sign which will be used for creating the new parameter. Click on it and it will automatically launch a new parameter tab. Inside that, enter the name of the parameter. So in this case it will be file source. You can give it any meaningful name and you can give your default value. So in this case we are giving the default value of source files, which is the name of our folder. So it is in the format the root folder / directory / files. In this case, since all the files are placed inside the root folder and you want the package to iterate through each of the files, we are not setting any value for the directory or for the file. That is why you see that 2 slashes at the end of source files. Source files is the root folder. There is no directory inside that and there is no specific file to which you are pointing here. So you will give source files // click on save. Then it will be giving back to your previous screen where you will be seeing the new parameter that you have created. Now select the parameter and automatically your expression will become dataset.fileSource, indicating that the property is now pointing to the file source parameter that is defined inside the dataset. Click on finish and you can see that it is now pointing to the dynamic parameter which you have created inside the dataset. Any value you pass through the parameter will be automatically reflected inside the source file path property. Go to the parameters tab and you can also see that correspondingly the new parameter has got created and it is now defaulting to the value of source files which you have passed. Anytime you want to change the name of your root folder, you can come here and change the name of the folder and automatically it get reflected inside the dataset properties. Now we need to repeat the same activity for your destination dataset, which is pointing to our on-premise SQL Server. So we will go to the destination dataset. There you can see the linked service which is currently pointing to your SQL Server. You can click on edit. Inside that you can see the properties for your server name, the database name, the username and the password. Which all properties you need to change, you can again click on the top of that window. Automatically the dynamic content link will be activated for that corresponding properties. Click on the dynamic content link and again you will be provided with the same interfaces you saw in the case of source dataset. So here I am going to create a new parameter through which I am going to pass the server name. I am going to name it as server name and I am going to pass it the default value of our instance name. So we can go to the SQL Management Studio, copy the instance name that is currently in our machine and you can paste it back onto the value tab for your new parameter. Click on save. Parameter will get saved. Select the parameter for the dynamic content and click on finish. Notice the difference in the expression here. Here it says linked service dot server name because the parameter is created for the linked service. In the previous case it was called dataset dot parameter name because the parameter was created at the dataset level. So click on finish here and again you can repeat the same for your database as well. You can create a new parameter called DB name and you can pass the name of your DB name and you can click on save. It will go back to the previous screen. Select the DB name parameter and click on finish. Like this it can be repeated for the username, the password and any other kind of properties that you want to set a dynamic value for. So for the sake of this demo I am just creating the parameters only for the server name and the DB name. Okay, you can click on test connection to ensure that the connection is still correct. It will again ask you for the values for the server name and the DB name. It will provide you with the default values. If you want to override it at this point of time, you can always come and override that value here, so that it runs with the modified values. So I am leaving it to default now, clicking on OK, and it will start testing for the connection based on these parameter values and the rest of the connection string. You can see that the connection is success, which indicates that the value that we pass through the parameters got successfully passed to the connection string. You can click on apply, and once the connection is confirmed, the properties will be saved inside the destination dataset. Now if you see the table name also, you are able to give a dynamic parameter for that. Click on that and just create the parameter name as table name, so that if you tomorrow if you want to map to a different table, that's also possible. And you are creating the default value as ADF underscore employee address, which is the name of the table that we have created now. Select the parameter and again click on finish. Again notice that here the parameter is created again at the dataset level and not at the linked services level. Properties like server name, DB name, username are all defined at the linked services level. Properties like table name, then file path, these kind of properties are defined at the data source level. So when you create the parameter also, the parameter will be created in the same scope. Click on finish, and you can see that now all the properties inside your destination as well as your source datasets are now pointing to parameters, which introduces the dynamicity inside your package. Anytime you want to modify any one of these properties, you can go to the corresponding parameters and pass the different value. Automatically the dynamic value you passed will get passed inside and gets applied to the corresponding properties. Now let's go to the pipeline, and you can see that inside the source, the sync properties, all the properties can be confirmed here. If you want to make anything dynamic here, you can also create a parameter at the pipeline level as well. So if you want to create a parameter at the pipeline level, you can again create, for example, it is now having a file source property which is pointing to the value which is passed by the parameters which was set at the dataset level. If you want to override that at the pipeline level, you can create another dynamic content here, and you can create a new parameter. This parameter will be created at the pipeline level. So here we are actually using file source. We are creating a new parameter called file source parameter, and we are giving a default value of source files. This is a different parameter. This is getting created at the pipeline level. The previous parameters we created were at the dataset level. So depending on at what level you want, you can introduce the dynamicity. So once you create on save, the parameter will get created at the pipeline level. Just select the parameter, and you can see that now the expression will change to pipeline.parameters.fileSource, indicating that now the parameter you created is at the pipeline level. Click on finish, and it has automatically become dynamic now. Similarly, if you want to manipulate any properties inside your sync, which is your SQL Server instance, you can go to the property and make it dynamic. Again, if you want to manipulate the table name from the pipeline level also, you can create a parameter for the table name from the pipeline level, and you can pass a default value like ADF underscore employee address. Click on save, and make sure that you map the property to the newly created parameter, which is the table name, and it will change to pipeline.parameters.table name. Click on finish, and this property will also be getting dynamic. Once you have created all the required properties and mapped them to the corresponding parameters, you can publish all of those changes. For every change you do inside the source dataset, destination dataset, pipeline, unless you publish, those changes will not get committed. Click on publish. Wait for those changes to get published. Once the changes are published, you can go to the pipeline tab and choose the option add trigger and select trigger now choice. This will give you the window to start the execution of the trigger. By default, it provides you with the details of all the parameters that you have defined at the pipeline level with their set default values. If you want to change the default value at this point in time, you can always go and override it. For the time being, I am just trying to run it using the default values itself. So we need to click on OK. Once we start on OK, the pipeline will start running. If you want to monitor the real-time execution of the pipeline, you can go to the monitor tab and keep on monitoring the status of the executing pipeline. You can keep on clicking refresh so that the status gets updated upon completion of the execution. Either the status would be succeeded or there will be some error which will be shown. In this case, our execution was success. So we can now go back to the SQL Server Management Studio and check the result. You should see all your data populated into the table correctly, which means that the current execution of the pipeline was a success and the pipeline took the value that we passed through the parameters and executed the data transfer based on that. So this gives you a quick demo on how you can set parameters at the pipeline and at the dataset level, and do a simple copy data activity by copying the data from files which are stored in Azure Data Lake onto a SQL Server instance which is on your local machine. As usual, I hope you found this video useful. Feel free to give your honest feedback and also feel free to share it to all your friends. For getting quick tip videos like this, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel dataplatformcentral.com and also click the bell icon for getting the notifications. Thank you all and have a nice day.